Hi, my name is Phil Gardner and welcome to Fun with Boxes. Today I'm taking a look at a rather wonderful Eurogame from GMT Games called Versailles 1919, designed by the collected brilliant minds of Mark Herman and Geoff Engelstein. You may know Geoff for his games Expanse the Board Game, The Fog of War, or for his line of great super skill pinball games, or even for his books on the board game hobby. And Mark has designed a great many games, a lot of which I have on my shelf behind me, in particular for The People, Empire of the Sun, and a special note for anyone looking to try out the Wargame inside of our wonderful board gaming hobby, Gettysburg. Mark's brilliant, simple, entry-level wargame that's easy to learn, quick to set up, and a joy to play. I covered this on the channel previously, so please check that episode out if you are interested in taking a look at this fine game. I will try to put a link on the screen for you, but if that does not appear on your screen right now, try the comments below, or why not even take a look through the channel. There may be other goodies you may want to check out too. And talking about war games, looking at the box cover of this game, you may be mistaken into thinking that this is in fact a war game. But in fact, this is a Eurogame of political competition over issues between the great powers as they write the treaty that will end World War I. In the game, you will play as one of the four great powers, choosing from the UK, US, France and Italy, using a card bidding system where you will place influence on the issues facing the powers to control how they will be written into the final treaty. And what a set of clever, elegant, brilliantly designed board game mechanics this game offers the player that really pulls you deep into this rich theme. It really is fantastic and offers so much strategy and replayability. And not only that, it teaches you a little bit of history too. What's not to like about this game? It's a win-win, unless that is you're playing against my wife, in which case it's more of a lose-lose. But who cares? It's the playing that matters, and there's lots to play in this wonderful board game box. But before we look at how the game plays, let's take a Fun with Boxes look at what you get inside this box of historical delights. You may well be forgiven for feeling perhaps a little overwhelmed when you first open the game box, as there may look like there's a lot of content here compared to your run-of-the-mill Euro games. And this is what sets GMT Games apart from other companies, in my humble opinion. Everything is quality, without being all bling and deluxified style over substance. Take the actual box that contains the fun. It's an absolute solid thick box that you know is going to last and keep your precious game nice and safe. I've had super deluxe big game boxes that have thin box covers that you know will not last the test of time, yet they are supposed to keep a ton of expensive plastic and cardboard tucked safely inside. GMT Games have quality you can feel right from the outside. First up inside the box, you will find what looks like two rule books. One is in fact the actual rulebook called Rules of Play, which coincidentally is the name of our local friendly game store. Details on the screen now for 10% off online orders for all Fun with Boxes viewers. And the other is a playbook, which offers you comprehensive, in-depth examples of play, provides you with historical notes on the cards used to play the game, and design notes from both Geoff and Mark, plus play aids. This again is something I found with a lot of GMT games. You do not just get the rules and off you go and learn the game yourself. They often provide you with a playbook to help ease you into the learning of their games. I first discovered this with their coin series of games. You could unpack everything, open up the playbook, set up the game, and it would hold your hand and take you through a few turns of the game, showing you just how everything in the game works. This really helps you and puts you in a great place to start your very first game, and you will be far more confident playing than if you only read through the rulebook. Next, you will find a sheet of counters for you to punch out and use in the game. I've already punched mine out some time ago, so no actual picture of the counter board here, but here is a picture of some of the counters just for you to see. Again, you may think these look complicated and think, what are they for and what do they mean? But they're just like the tokens you use in other games, and once you start playing, they all make sense. You will also find the handy dandy scoring pad to tally up the points at the end of the game, and a solo player aid, as Versailles 1919 is a 1 to 4 player game. You will learn the main rules for the game, and then there are special rules for playing with 2 players and a special mode to be able to play the game solo against automated rules, or bots as they are referred to in the game. And the solo player aid is a handy reference to help you when you decide to tackle the game on your own. Next, we have the various ultra high quality cards for the game and the wooden components that will represent your political influence and military during the game. Finally, you will behold the amazing game board, super thick and high quality. Another sign of GMT Games' brilliance in the hobby, and it is only after you play the game do you realise just how well laid out and just how much thought went into the design of this great board for the game. Everything you need is included on it, clear and easy to read, that will aid your gameplay as well as giving you the board to play the game on. Setup. Setup is very, very straightforward. Just follow the steps in the rulebook and you will end up with something like this, which was our setup for our 2-player game, where I played the UK and Lisa played France. We also set up some of the US tokens to play as per the 2-player variant rules. Gameplay. The board is split into 2 halves. The left-hand side is where the main action of settling issues takes place. Here we have the waiting room, where the issues awaiting our attention are located, along with some key historical figures that attended or influenced the conference. And then the table itself, which contains the 2 issues the leaders are currently discussing, along with a historical figure who has joined or is influencing the conference. On the right-hand side, we have a couple of different areas that are also important to the game. We have the region track at the top, which shows the level of unrest in each region as the issues affecting each region are discussed and the treaty written. On the bottom right, we have the area where influence used to sway the issues are stored, along with any military units that have been used. To the left of that, we have the Demobilise area, where we can move military units to show that they have been returned to their homelands, and the happiness track as well, to track how happy the populace of each nation is with the progress of the treaty, along with the game end happiness bonus points table. Playing the game is pretty straightforward, and you would quickly get used to the flow of the game and begin to understand how your actions are affecting the way the treaty is being written, and in turn, your path through to victory. Turn structure. On your turn, you must take 1 political action and may take 1 military action either before or after that political action. So the political action is mandatory and the military action is optional. Let's take a look at the political action first. It's split into 3 possible actions and you must take only 1 of them. First action, place an influence. You must place influence cubes on any 2 issues that are either in the waiting room or on the table. When you have finished placing influence cubes onto 2 issues, you must have the most cubes on both those issues. And finally, you can only place influence cubes from your available pool in front of you. You cannot pull cubes from the exhausted box or from anywhere else. Here is an example. This is the current position with 3 issues in the waiting room, where currently the US has the most influence on the military influence issue, France the most on the Transylvania issue, and the UK with the most on the issue affecting Southwest Africa. On the table currently being discussed, France has the most influence over the Ethiopia issue, and the US has the most influence over France on the disarmament issue. As the UK player, I think I am interested in the issues currently on the table. So I have to place influence on the 2 issues, and after placing influence, I must have the most on both the issues I have placed my influence tokens on. So I will place 2 influence now on Ethiopia so that I am ahead of France, and will have to place 5 influence cubes on the disarmament issue to take the lead over the US there, who has 4. Reclaim influence and military. You may take up to 6 of your own influence cubes from the exhausted box. Plus, if you have any military units in the exhausted box, you must take them back. Additionally, you may take back any military units from the region track that you have deployed there previously. The exhausted box has an annotation on it to remind you of this. Okay, so both the place influence and the reclaim influence of military units are very quick and simple actions. You are placing influence onto issues that you want to try to settle and get written into the treaty, or to try and stop other settling issues thereafter. Plus, when you are running low on influence to use, you will be reclaiming them along with any military units you have exhausted. This leaves us with the third and final political action you may take on your turn, which is the settle an issue action. And this is the main big action really within the game. And this has a number of stages to work through, all of which are numbered directly onto the game board to help you along. And you also have a player aid card breaking this down for you too. And once you've taken the settle action a few times, you'll be able to perform this quite quickly, as it all flows naturally once you're used to it. Firstly, you can only settle an issue if it's on the table for discussions. And you may only settle an issue if it has at least one influence cube on it of any player, not necessarily your own. And this is very important. You can settle an issue even if you have no influence on it, or if you do not have the most influence on it. And there are reasons for why you would do this that become apparent as you play the game. Without trying to jump ahead, for example, you are the active player and decide to settle an issue where you do not have the most influence. The person with the most influence will take the issue and take any of the actions on the card, but because you are the active player, you will get all your influence back to your available pool. So the US here could choose to give up on getting the most influence on this issue and take back all of their 4 influence to use this on a later turn to focus on another issue perhaps. But not only do they get all their influence back, the US as the active player that turn will get to control the agenda and decide which issue and event cards come onto the table for discussion next. So this could be a tactic to use in the game, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's take a look at how settling an issue works step by step. Step 1. You take the active player card and place this in front of you, just so that everyone knows you are the active player that turn. The person who controls the issue, that is the person with the most cubes on that issue, will have all their cubes placed into the exhausted pool. So in my example, the UK controls the issue, so all their cubes go into the exhausted box. If you, as the active player, did not control the issue, all of your influence is returned to you. So in my example, I am the US player and the active player, so I take back all 4 of my influence cubes. Any other players with influence place half of their cubes rounded down into the exhausted area and the rest are returned to them. So France here has 1 cube returned to them and the other placed in the exhausted box. If France had 3 influence cubes here instead of 2, 1 would be placed in the exhausted box and 2 returned to the player. The controlling player takes the issue and places it in front of themselves and selects one of the options on the card, placing any token or tokens, if appropriate, onto the card and performing the action shown. Again, using my example, the UK player controlled and won this issue and they have decided to select and resolve the extreme action. As a result, unrest in Europe is increased by 3. In addition, they must place a UK naval strategy counter onto the settled issue along with 2 German reparation counters. Just some additional information here. If the issue has 2 flags for the counter that is to be placed, the controlling player gets to choose which flag counter to place. So with this issue, if the Greece option had been taken, the player could choose to place a UK or US naval counter, not both. Step 2. Now we have settled the issue, we look at the conference event card, the bottom of the event card. If there's an influence cube on this card, then the person owning that cube can perform this action. Otherwise, the active player performs this. If it is optional, they can choose to take the action or not. But if it does not say it's optional, then they must perform the action. So here the active player, which is the US in my example, could optionally exhaust 2 influence cubes to reduce unrest from Europe. And meaning as the UK player just increased unrest by 3, they decide to spend 2 influence and drop it back 2 spaces. How crafty. Then you remove the event card from the conference table. Step 3. The active player chooses one of the issues in the waiting room and moves that to the table, moving all influence that is on it with it. Then they choose one of the 2 event cards and move that to the conference table. If there's an influence cube icon on the card, they may add one of their own influence cubes to guarantee that they will take the action on that card the next time an issue is settled, regardless of whether or not they are the active player at that time. Step 4. The active player adds an issue to the waiting room. Here the player has 2 options. For free, they can draw the top 2 issue cards, pick one to place in the waiting room and the other to place on the discard pile. Or they can place the top card from the discard pile instead into the waiting room for free, or place the second card in the discard pile into the waiting room by placing an influence cube into the exhausted pool, or place the third card in the discard pile into the waiting room by exhausting 2 influence cubes. Again, the graphics on the board show you this as a reminder. Finally, step 5. The active player draws the top event card and places that into the waiting room, activating the top part of the card, performing this crisis event immediately. So here the player would lose 1 happiness for each deployed military unit they have. So in this example, the UK has 1 military unit deployed in Europe and would lose 1 happiness, which you would show on the happiness track. This covers the 3 different political actions: placing influence, reclaiming influence and settling issues, one of which you must take on your turn. Before we look at the optional military action you can take before or after your political action, let's just take a quick look at the card icons and see what they mean. Here is the happiness icon, and you simply increase a nation's happiness if it's a happy icon and decrease it if it's a sad icon. The clenched fist icon represents unrest, signifying that leaders in a particular region have been impacted by the negotiations. The clenched fist means you increase unrest, and the fist with a red cross through it means that you decrease the unrest. The unrest counter can never move onto a space with a powder keg or into a space with a military unit. The powder keg icon moves the powder keg counter. But please note, if there's an unrest token in the way, that unrest token is moved forward 1 space. And if the powder keg ever was to move back, you leave the unrest token where it was. And now on to the military action. This is an optional action you can take during your turn and can be one of 2 actions: deploy or demobilise. Deploy. You can place a military unit onto a region track into any columns 5 through to 8 that does not already contain one of your military units. You cannot use exhausted or demobilise units, and these must come from your available area. It must be placed into an empty space, and units of different players may be placed onto the same track. Depending on what column you place the unit, there may be happiness and influence effects. Placing it in column 8 provides you with a bid strength of 2 when bidding on issues that become unsettled due to an uprising, which I will cover later. Columns 5 to 7 allow you to add 1 or take away 1 from an uprising roll in that region, and also provide a bid strength of 2. And additionally, depending where you place your influence, columns 5 to 7 will also let you retrieve a number of influence cubes indicated from the exhausted pool, but also will impact and reduce your happiness. Demobilise. You can take a military marker from your available pool, the exhausted pool or the region track, and place it into the highest available space, increasing your happiness by the indicated amount. This unit is now effectively out of the game, and this represents the military returning to their homeland. You may have noticed that around the happiness track are military markers. If your happiness ever drops to 10 or less, you can only have 2 military tokens in play. If you have 3 units in play, you must immediately demobilise one of them and place them onto the 1 space. And any number of units may occupy the 1 space, unlike the other spaces, which can only accept 1 unit. Again, if your happiness drops to 4 or less, then you can only have 1 unit and must demobilise your other unit and place it in the 1 space. Finally, if your happiness ever reduces to 0, you demobilise your last military unit and will suffer a negative 5 points at the end of the game. Additionally, you may never increase your happiness when it is at 0. So, there you have all the main actions of the game covered for the political and military actions. But there's one more important thing you need to know about, and that is Uprising and Uprising Checks. Uprising Checks. During the game, an uprising may occur due to an issue aligned to a region changing control, or the event card entering the waiting room causing a crisis, or from events triggered in the conference itself. If an uprising check is triggered, the active player performs the following steps, and, as with the settling an issue action, the uprising check is summarised on the handy player aid card. And once again, what could seem as something complex is actually very straightforward, thanks to the great rulebook and the player aids. First, determine the region of the uprising. Use the region specified, or if none, then check to see which region or regions whose unrest markers are the furthest to the right. If there's a tie, you do a separate check for each region. Then you check for an uprising. Look at the column contained in the unrest token. If the column has an X at the bottom, then no uprising occurs and you may continue the game as normal. If the column does not have an X, then you will need to make an uprising roll, and if the number rolled is equal to or higher than the number indicated, an uprising occurs. It may be possible to modify the die roll, plus or minus 1, if any player has a military token in columns 5, 6 or 7 in the region concerned. If multiple players have counters in the region, then they all must announce whether or not they are modifying the roll and whether it's positive or negative, with the active player choosing last. If after modifying the result is equal to or higher than the unrest level, then an uprising occurs in the region. Next, we would then determine the unsettled issue. First, you select a player who will be affected by this uprising, and that will be the player with the most issues in that region that is subjected to the uprising. If no one has any issues in that region, then no uprising will occur. If multiple players are tied, the player with the military unit closest to the left chooses the affected player. And if there are no military units in the region, then each affected player would roll the die, and the highest roller is the player selected for the uprising. Then select the issue that is the subject of the uprising, which will be the highest value issue, and in the case of a tie, the player chooses which issue will be selected. Players then bid for control over the now unsettled issue. Starting with the active player and going clockwise around the table, players bid on the issue by using available military or influence or pass. If the issue has a no military icon, then players may only bid influence cubes and not military units. Only military that is available or in the same region can be used. Military in the same region count as a military bid of 2 power, and a player's bid must match or exceed the number of military units each other player has bid. And if it matches it, it must include additional influence cubes greater than each other player. Once all players have passed, the player with the most military, or if tied, the most influence, wins the issue. The winning bidder moves all of their bid to the exhausted pool, and all other players' bids are returned or remain in the region it was prior to the uprising. If no one bids, then the issue is placed into the discard pile, and the winning bidder also loses 1 happiness for each military unit used in the bid. Then we reset the region's unrest. First, move the powder keg up 1 level in that region, and then move the unrest token from wherever it was so that it is 1 space to the right of it. Finally, the winner removes any existing strategy counters from the issue and then selects which one of the options to activate on the now re-won issue, placing counters and adjusting happiness and applying other icon effects as they would had they settled the issue. Strategy cards. One important last step here is that if this was the first uprising in the game, then all players must declare which strategy card they will be using for the rest of the game. These end-game objectives, if you prefer this definition, are randomly set up at the beginning of the game and placed to the side of the board in the area indicated. And there will be a number of cards available based on the number of players plus 1. To determine the order the cards are chosen, you follow these steps. Each player adds up the total number of star values on each of their controlled issues. The player with the lowest score chooses first and places a strategy counter onto the card to show they've chosen it. Then the player with the next lowest star total chooses, and you repeat this until all players have chosen a card, and there will be 1 card remaining which can be returned to the box. All chosen cards remain in place so that everyone can see which card the players have chosen. Game end and final scoring. When a game end card rushed to the finish is drawn from the issue deck, it is placed immediately into the waiting room and play continues as normal. But when that issue is eventually settled, the player with control takes the card and the game ends immediately with the card being worth 7 victory points, and all players calculate their final score using the included scorepad. Players will gain points for controlled issues. Simply add up all the victory points shown on your controlled issue cards. Then for strategy counters, additionally you score 1 victory point for each strategy counter with your national flag on it, and gain any victory points based on the condition indicated on their chosen strategy cards. And for this you will be scoring for strategy counters placed on any issue, not just on the ones you control. And finally, you will score victory points based on your position on the happiness track as indicated on the board. And the player with the highest score wins. And don't forget that scoring pad is very helpful and takes you through each step of the scoring process. Negotiations. Just a quick note here, we have only played the game at the 2-player count and did not do this, but throughout the game you're allowed to negotiate deals with your fellow players, though they must be made publicly and are binding, but only for the immediate transactions. Future promises are not binding, and I would imagine this would bring the game an extra layer of gameplay shenanigans for 3 to 4 player games. Well, what a truly fantastic game. The rulebook is a joy, well laid out and plenty of examples to help you understand how each part of the game works. Add to this the playbook with its highly detailed examples of play, and you should be able to play your first game with some confidence. And regardless, within a few rounds, you will be up to speed and enjoying the game through to its conclusion. Everything about the game and its mechanics really bring the theme to life. It really is incredible. The way you bring issues into the room and then bring up the issues you want to discuss to try to settle them by bringing them to the table and having to deal with uprisings and events that happen as a result of these issues is spellbinding. There's a real depth and strategy to this game, and the replayability is enormous. Added to this, you have a full solo experience that looks like it will be a very rewarding challenge and something I definitely would like to try out in the future. I simply cannot recommend this game enough. 2 massive Fun with Boxes thumbs up for this game. Well, thanks again for watching, and please do take care. Bye for now.